The second LP was one of the first records I ever bought. For me, as a young musician interested in electronics, it was a game changer. And Carlos's cutting-edge take on the classics was about to cross over into film. Carlos heard that the director, Stanley Kubrick, was making a new picture. A grim, uncompromising, futuristic one. Much of it shot here at Thamesmead in London. A picture that might be the ideal platform for Carlos's synthesized classical sound. Kubrick had never shied away from difficult material, and this was to be his toughest film yet, and music had to be central to the story. After all, as it said on the poster, A Clockwork Orange deals with the adventures of a young man whose principal interests are rape, ultraviolence, and Beethoven. Unsolicited, Carlos sent Kubrick an electronic interpretation of Beethoven, as well as an original composition. Kubrick saw their potential, and alongside conventional orchestral recordings, the finished film would also feature Carlos's renditions of Purcell, Rossini, and Beethoven. Here, Beethoven's Ode to Joy is given an almost comical swagger, matching the cockiness of the film's protagonist, Alex. It's bright and cartoony, echoing the clothes and the set design. The brilliance of Carlos's music is that it complements the orchestral sounds, but adds another layer. The electronics make it sound not only futuristic, but heightened and energized, as if we're listening to Beethoven on mescaline. In fact, it's hard to imagine what Kubrick would have done without the enhanced musical palette that Carlos's score provides. To cure Alex of his psychopathic violence, his beloved Beethoven music is co-opted into a form of aversion therapy, ultimately turning him suicidal whenever he hears it. At the climax of the film, a conventional recording of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony subtly morphs into a distorted rendition by Carlos, taking us inside Alex's head, giving us music we know in a new and terrifying way. Like Forbidden Planet, A Clockwork Orange benefited hugely from an outsider, by their own initiative and unsolicited, sending what they understood in the way of electronic music to the filmmaker, and thereby, for all of us, greatly enhancing the possibilities of the soundtrack. But the early 70s would see the soundtrack being enhanced in another way, one that would draw on the same technology as A Clockwork Orange, but to different ends. It was the other sonic possibility opened up by the Byrds, the use of sound effects as a storytelling device. Sound had become something of an American preoccupation. This was the era of Watergate, of eavesdropping, paranoia even. When you weren't afraid of being seen, you were afraid of being heard. In the early 1970s, a new generation of surveillance equipment was developed, which meant that you could home in on a single conversation, even in a place like this. If you were listening on the other end, who knows what you might overhear. Like the Byrds, the opening title sequence of Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation has no music. Instead, we're made to listen to the faint sounds of the environment, only gradually becoming louder as the shot slowly zooms in on San Francisco's Union Square. So far, so innocuous, and then image and sound unexpectedly diverge.
What was that? Is that a mistaken projection? No, here it is again. So it must be intentional, but what is it? And then gradually the audience can piece together the mystery of what this stuff is.
A surprising shot change reveals a menacing figure on a rooftop. Only then do we realise that the sounds are really distortion on the rifle-like surveillance equipment being used to eavesdrop on one particular couple. Exactly what the couple are saying becomes an obsession for the conversation's central character, surveillance expert Harry Cole, played by Gene Hackman. This isn't just a film that uses sound, it's about sound, and it was the ideal vehicle for Walter Murch, who'd made his name working on the sound and editing for Coppola's The Godfather and George Lucas's science fiction film THX 1138. Murch was also fascinated with the electronic technology of the time, including the instrument that was rapidly becoming ubiquitous, the Moog synthesizer.
I had studied the Moog synthesizer. I used it on The Conversation. In my mind, I was thinking that Harry Cole in that film had invented digital recording. And so the question was, what does digital recording sound like when it's not going very well? And so I came up with a use of the synthesizer to crush the sound and abuse it.
By the climax of The Conversation, the sound effects have become increasingly detached from reality. They and the music score seem to have become one, accentuating our sense of Harry Cole's paranoia.
About halfway through the film, there's almost no dialogue. And when dialogue stops, your mind, which is looking for meaning, where's the meaning in this? Well, I'm not getting it from dialogue, so I have to get it from somewhere else. And if we, the filmmakers, have put meaning into the sound effects, you can pull meaning out of it.
Do you think that The Conversation is a film where the sound ultimately is the main driver of the narrative?
Because the main character is a sound recordist, it's told all from his point of view. He listens to the world, so we begin to listen to the world.
In their different ways, Walter Murch and Walter Carlos had exploited the novelty and unfamiliarity of synthesized sound. But as the 70s went on, the synthesizer really took off, and not just in the movies. Its pulsating rhythms became synonymous with the disco boom, especially in the wake of Donna Summer's seminal 1977 hit, I Feel Love. The song was co-written and produced by Italian-born Giorgio Moroder. And when the owners of Moroder's record label branched out into film production, they thought he might be ideal to score a gritty drama set in a Turkish prison, Midnight Express. They had a hunch audiences would be ready for a Moroder electronic soundtrack. In this scene, you can hear how Moroder brings key elements of the disco toolkit to his score. It's built on a rhythm, using the most primal beat of all, a heartbeat. He adds ambient washes of synthesizer sound, the kind that could never be created with a conventional orchestra. Finally, Moroder introduces the melody, a simple, repetitive cycle of notes. With Midnight Express, Moroder showed that a fully electronic score could work perfectly for a contemporary drama. Hollywood was impressed and awarded the pop maestro an Oscar for his debut effort. Moroder gave this hard film the hard electronic edge it needed, but a question remained over electronics. Could they be warm? Could they be moving? Or even inspirational, the way that an orchestral soundtrack could? In 1981, we found out. Chariots of Fire was produced, like Midnight Express, by David Putnam, and its score was created by another European who'd made his name in pop music, Vangelis. I felt right from the start what you caught was a sense of effort. Yeah. How did you imagine that into your music?
I don't know, that happens. I can't really explain, because it's instinctive, and I felt, this first scene, the runners on the beach, I felt that this needs some kind of enthusiasm, oxygen, youth.
Vangelis Papathanasiou emerged from the 1960s Greek prog rock scene, yes, there was one, where he was the keyboardist in a band with Demis Roussos. In the 1970s, he recorded a series of solo electronic albums and documentary soundtracks, which brought him to the attention of director Hugh Hudson.
I thought about it from the very beginning. Literally, as I read the script, I wanted to use Vangelis. I didn't want anybody else. The task was to persuade people to use such a contemporary form of music in such a period film.
Okay, so the first theme, it was this.
The Chariots of Fire theme was only composed at the 11th hour. Hugh Hudson originally wanted to use a track from one of Vangelis' albums.
Hugh at the time told me, don't think about the opening. The opening, we have it. But do the rest, and I did the rest. And then in my mind, I was not very happy. I said, I have to do that, I have to try. And I sat down, and that's it. And then that became this. I can't play the I need Mr. Bean to do it.
Chariots of Fire focuses on two rival British sprinters competing in the 1924 Olympics, the Scottish missionary Eric Liddell and the intensely driven Harold Abrahams. Vangelis' music captures their very different personalities. In this scene, Abrahams is recalling a race he's just lost to Liddell. The banging of the seats seems to be hammering in Abrahams' sense of defeat. But even that sound fades under Vangelis' sparse score as we share Abrahams' self-absorption.
He was a tormented character. He had his own reasons to run, and he had to win, and he did win. And I think he was much more concerned to win. Liddell was maybe, more natural to win. The best line of the film, to me, it's that when he says, God made me for a purpose, and when I run, I feel his pleasure. That's a great line.
And I love the moment when you hear that again
Oh,
as
when it's
he's
a
running.
repeated image, yeah,
And
repeated
as his
voice.
head goes back, your music explodes.